you, everybody. Welcome. This is our second deep dive of the day. Today we're going to talk about federal requirements and reporting. I am Kelsey Beckmeyer, she, her pronouns. I am the CoC manager with KCRHA. And while I am quite familiar with all of these, I would not claim deep expertise. So there may be some questions you have that I'm not able to fully expand upon, but we'll definitely capture any questions that we need to provide further guidance on for you all. So please keep that in mind as we go through. We will do this. So we held a deep dive earlier today on transitional housing, and we'll kind of go about doing this in the same way. We'll move through slides, and then at the very end, we'll go through all of the questions. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And when we get to the end, we will kind of go through those. I want to just do a quick note that earlier this morning, there was a preliminary injunction hearing with HUD regarding the cases brought by both the National Alliance and a group of states. The preliminary injunction was granted, and this is to kind of hold on HUD from imposing any changes or requirements. So at this moment in time, we are keeping things kind of as is. We are not reopening RFPs right now, and waiting for kind of further guidance. There was also indication in the hearing that HUD planned to publish an updated NOFO by the end of today. So that could happen during this session as it's hitting 5 o'clock on the East Coast. We again won't know more until we see also the written order from the judge and their review of the updated NOFO in alignment with the preliminary injunction order. So more to come, but do anticipate a quiet week next week, which I, for one, am not too upset about. And we will keep everybody updated as soon as we hear more. With all that said, we will dive in to the deep end on federal requirements and reporting. This is in connection and relation to continuum of care or CoC funding. So please keep that in mind. So we are going to cover a number of topics in this session. We will address a lightly CoC core program framework and requirements, federal grant management, costs and match and program income a little bit, monitoring, reporting, and HMIS requirements, and then some key compliance takeaways for you all to hold at the front of your minds. So first, I want to cover CoC core program and framework requirements. These are all outlined in 24 CFR 578, which is a CoC interim program rule. That is the kind of deep federal regulation regarding the CoC program. The CoC program was codified into law with the Hearth Act of 2009, with final regulations being the interim program rule in 2012. Geez Louise. The purpose of the CoC program is really to foster community-wide collaboration on ending homelessness by coordinating housing and services, funding providers to quickly rehouse people, connecting folks to mainstream programs, and promoting self-sufficiency to aim for long-term stability. So a large focus of this is to have locally driven plans on how we are both funding and addressing programs that are supporting to end people's experiences of homelessness with a primary driver on permanent housing. Providers receiving CoC funding must comply with both 24 CFR Part 578, which is the program interim rule, and with federal grant management rules that are outlined under the uniform guidance of 2 CFR Part 200. So both of those are really important in terms of understanding all of the rules and compliance for federal grants for the CoC program. Under the CoC, there are particular program components that are eligible, and there are eligible cost categories. The program components are the types of projects that are funded, and the eligible costs are what you can charge to operate those program components. So the program components include permanent housing, which is inclusive of permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, transitional housing, joint component, which is a combination of transitional housing and rapid rehousing. Safe havens, these are old projects that were brought into the CoC if you were operating one in 2009. There are no new safe haven projects. Supportive services only, which is inclusive of coordinated entry and HMIS. A note that only the HMIS lead entity can apply for a program component that is an HMIS program. The eligible cost activities that are allowed under CoC include leasing, rental assistance, operating costs, supportive services, project administrative costs, and you can request for HMIS costs, which are costs related to entering data in HMIS. So while only the HMIS lead entity can have a program component that is HMIS, individual projects may have an eligible cost category that is HMIS cost category. We just want to be able to make a clear distinction there because there are some clear rules around HMIS programs. To be a recipient or to participate in having CoC funds, you must be a nonprofit, tribal, or government entity. You must operate in a CoC approved geographic area. And your participation includes being a part of planning activities and submitting applications through the CoC. So this is the local application process we do during the annual Notice of Funding Opportunity, or the NOFO. CoC cost match. Yep, I was like, why is this coming up? Because it's connected to CoC particularly. I did some reorganizing and my brain hasn't fully clicked that we did that. I did that. So want to note specific to CoC that there are match requirements. Those who were in the earlier session should be familiar with this slide. All CoC projects generally require a 25% match from other non-CoC funds. Ignore the non-federal, that was a typo on my part. If you have other federal dollars that are not CoC dollars, you may be able to use those as CoC match. You'll want to be careful to see if the other federal dollars require match so that you're not duplicating funds in any way. So just a note there. Match can be cash or in kind. It can only be applied to CoC eligible program costs. So the example that I like to provide is with rental assistance. So one thing that is not allowed with CoC dollars is the payment of rental arrears or past rental debts. If your program is paying rental arrears with another fund source, you cannot count that money toward your match because it's not an eligible CoC program cost. So you do need to be careful to not count match that is for ineligible costs. Your match does not need to align with the specific HUD budget. So, for example, if all of your budget is support services, your match dollars could be related to operating. You don't have to have that budget line item in your HUD budget to be able to consider it match. They just need to make sure to be eligible program costs. An important internal control to have is a written policy and procedure on how you are describing, um, identifying match and tracking match. Match contributions do need to meet uniform guidance cost principles, which are allowable, reasonable, applicable, and documented. We will cover uniform cost guidance in a moment. You need to maintain records of the source and the use of the match, thus having very clear tracking and documentation records. And cash match must be received as revenue, spent on eligible CoC expenses, tracked consistently throughout the entire period of performance, and reconciled to what is reported at the grant closeout. So if at the grant closeout you are showing that you spent 115,000 in of a $120,000 grant, you need to reconcile your match amount to show that you spent 25% of the 115,000 you spent. It's not related to what is awarded, but to what you are spending at the end of the grant. Match can also be in kind, but there are particular requirements for in-kind match. This can include donated property, equipment, goods, or services, and it can only count again if the cost would be CoC eligible if paid with grant funds. And it also has to align with uniform guidance on cost principles. An MOU is required for any in-kind services before grant execution. So if you have third-party services, you need to be able to have that detailed MOU that specifies the unconditional commitment, the service type, the provider profession, and the hourly value. Services need to reflect market rates. And then service hours need to be tracked and retained for monitoring and inspection should the grant be monitored by HUD or KCRHA to ensure that the in-kind services were properly accounted for. We are going to shift over from just kind of general CoC to overall federal grant management. This is information that will pertain to any and all federal grants that are received, not just CoC funding. So we'll talk about financial standards, cost principles, and then direct and indirect costs. So there are budget requirements that need to be included and within your financial standards. You have to clearly detail eligible costs, and they must be related to the CoC funded activity. It can't be just any old cost. They have to align with the program that you are receiving federal dollars for. Costs must be reasonable, and you must comply with financial management requirements. I've listed in 2 CFR 200, which is the kind of financial controls and cost principles, the kind of some key areas to look at in detail in terms of your financial management structures and internal controls. They also detail some information on cost sharing and match, program income, budget revisions and amendments, and then tracking of property, inventory, and equipment. Highlighting the property, inventory, and equipment because there are certain responsibilities if you have, say you have computers that are worth X amount of money, you may need to track the depreciation value of those. So there's certain financial thresholds that if anything is over, and maybe don't quote me on this, but I want to say that it's $10,000. Anything over 10,000, that sounds right to me, but someone can fact check me. that you have to track the depreciation value of those things regarding your program. So 2 CFR 200 is a very, very important CFR to be reviewing in terms of financial management and regulations. I don't know why I animated this one. So detailed federal cost principles are outlined in subpart E of 2 CFR 200. These detail what are allowable under federal awards for costs. So costs need to be necessary and reasonable to carry out an award, allocable to the awarded funded activity, authorized or not prohibited under state or local laws, treated consistently, consistent with generally accepted accounting practices, adequately documented, and incurred during the approved budget period. The incurred during the approved budget period is important as you are not able to prepay for certain things. This is, I think, mostly pertinent around payments of rent, particularly near the end of a grant period. So being very careful about when you are prepaying any rent when your grant is ending. There are some allowabilities, so pay close attention to when you may do that. Just kind of general rules of thumb related to the cost principles. When you are developing a budget or putting down certain cost asks, ask yourself if this is allowable. So does the eligible cost exist under the program rules? And for the CoC, that's the CoC interim program rule. If there's any special considerations, so federal funds cannot be used for entertainment, fundraising, or lobbying. So making sure that those considerations are taken into account. That if the cost is reasonable, and the kind of general rule that is followed is, would a prudent person find this to be a reasonable cost? So this is similar to the reasonable person standard. So would just kind of anyone you're going toward who is reviewing this budget find that this is a necessary cost and a reasonable cost? A good way to do that is through doing comparable market prices and making kind of a decision around landing in that median range. And then is the cost allocable? Was this assigned in the federal award or your cost objective? So this is, are you charging operation costs, but you don't have operation costs in your budget? This is a big one that we often see. So you need to make sure that it's been allocated in what you've been awarded. I want to also touch on an allowable cost versus an approved cost. So an allowable cost is how funds can be spent. That must, meet the federal cost principles. It needs to be necessary and reasonable, allocable, consistent, adequately documented. And then there are approved costs. So this is what's included in the actual budget. So this is a snapshot below of a HUD agreement and the cost categories. So this particular agreement had supportive services detailed and administrative costs detailed. So if this program was wanting to charge cost and they wanted to charge for building maintenance for a transitional housing building, but they are not operating from that building, they don't have operating costs, you cannot charge operating costs to the support services budget for that building. Now, if you are operating your support service project from a building and you are charging some overhead costs related to maintenance of that building in a shared space, that could be billed under support services. But you have to be very careful to be looking at what is approved in my budget, and am I allowed to apply this cost to my approved budget? Costs are classified in two ways. There's no universal rule around classifying costs, but they are done so as either direct costs or indirect costs. Direct costs are those that are specifically identified in your award and specifically connected to the activity that you are awarded to do. So these may be salaries and benefits for a case manager, a rental assistance check that's paid to a landlord, mileage reimbursement for staff who is doing home visits or taking somebody to a medical appointment, where indirect costs are those costs that are incurred for shared or joint objectives. Think rent of a shared space, think payroll processing for the team, HR costs, roles that only a portion of this cost is directly connected to the project. So direct costs include, again, all salaries and wages for direct staff working on that project, applicable fringe benefits, materials and supplies, direct services, travel costs, and if you have a sub award, this is not relevant for most, but if there's a sub award, up to the first 25,000 of each sub award may be direct costs. Again, this is a semi unrelevant for you all. Direct costs do not include equipment, capital expenditures, rental costs. So if you are paying rent to a landlord, that's not a direct cost. Tuition remission, or participant support costs. HUD also has an indirect cost toolkit to help break down by budget line item. So we've linked it here for your referral. Again, indirect costs are the costs that are not, there are no clear set requirements on how they should be invoiced. There's good practices that there are. HUD doesn't have one standard that they provide. There is the toolkit to support, but need to make sure that each subrecipient or recipient bills direct costs and includes those indirect costs only to the direct costs that are included in an invoice. So you need to bill to each activity type or budget line item, such as support services or administration. So if you are billing indirect costs, you can bill indirect costs to each major budget line item. If you've got support services, operating, and project admin, indirect can be charged to each of those activity types. There are options of reimbursement for indirect. There's the 15% de minimis rate. That is the base rate for federal grants. This is that 15% of your modified total direct cost. You don't need documentation to justify or approval required. You do still need to have, general ledger and showing how you came up with this, but there's less stringent documentation requirements for using the de minimis rate. If you have a negotiated indirect cost rate, you need to have the actual indirect cost agreement with the cognizant federal agency. That has to be on file, and you have to show how you are allocating those costs. Finally, there's a cost allocation plan, and this is a document that identifies and explains the disbursement of allowable direct and indirect costs to declare the allocation methods that you're using for distribution. I am not an expert on indirect costs. They make my head spin a little bit. So if you have more detailed questions, put them in the chat so we can make sure that those who are more deeply familiar with indirect costs can answer those questions more thoroughly. Oh, goodness. You will need to have clear policies and procedures around eligible costs. So review your application, look at the list of eligible costs, your expenses, in order to align clearly what your budget is asking for when it comes to CoC costs. Decide what costs you'll use for the CoC grant and CoC match. Make sure that's in your policy of how you make those determinations. And if you have additional funding beyond match, those don't have to be for eligible CoC costs. If you have over 25% match supporting this project, those costs can be used for what those costs are eligible to be spent on. It's good to have a procedure, though, for those internal controls, just to ensure that the costs are eligible and you've got documentation supporting those costs. And maintain it. Records, keep records. Those are very important. Financial records need to be kept on file for a good amount of time. I want to say 15 years for audit purposes. Those include employee timesheets, pay stubs, leases, letters from property managers, receipts for eligible items. Those all need to be kept, recorded, maintained in case of an audit. So next, we will talk about policies, monitoring, and record keeping. If you are creating a brand new program, you are new to federal funding, it's important to make sure you have clear policies and procedures. You want to ensure with those that there's consistency and fairness across the board and that you're meeting all regulatory requirements. There'll be two lanes as you develop policies and procedures. There are overall organizational operations that need particular policies and procedures, and then program operations have certain requirements for policies and procedures. That also include participant documentation and the record keeping. This might look a little overwhelming, so trying to bucket it out a little bit for you. This will also, again, be online, but there's kind of three buckets of agency level policies. We've got governance and compliance, financial management and internal controls, and then general oversight, monitoring, and records. Rather than read through all of these, just state that it's important to ensure you have really clear policies. Some of these, we may have the ability to provide templates for you or recommendations. The CoC written standards, which are online, working on improving and updating those, do include some of these kind of governance and oversight principles. So please refer to that for some guidance. And knowing that a lot of you with existing agencies and been doing this work, even if you don't have federal dollars, may already have a lot of these policies already in place. At the program level, the policies may differ a little bit depending upon the program type that you're operating. For instance, a rental assistance or rapid rehousing program would have very different requirements than a supportive services only project. That project might not need a lease and occupancy and rent policy because you're not doing that. So you may not need all of these policies. But in general, the buckets that we see are participant eligibility and access, housing and assistance administration, participant protections, data and performance documentation. The ones that I will highlight, there's VAWA policy and emergency transfer plan. KCRAJ has that for a system level that you may adapt for your individual project. And the participant grievance and appeals is another one that our Ombuds office has been working on developing a template. Just quickly, if folks are unmuted, if you would please mute so we have less background noise, that would be very helpful. Thank you. The other one I want to highlight here is a termination of assistance policy. This is important, especially at intake, for folks to understand what that policy is and due process. termination of assistance cannot just happen willy-nilly. There are particular requirements that HUD wants to see in order to determine that there was clear due diligence on the project's end to both work with and inform participants. Record keeping, I want to highlight 24 CFR 578.103. This details the documentation requirements for a number of things, including homelessness eligibility, those emergency transfers for participants fleeing from DV. This is for any project, not just a DV serving project. Income documentation standards, housing standards, service assessments match, record retention. So this is a good area to ensure that you are thoroughly reviewing. For monitoring and audit requirements, there are both requirements in 2 CFR Part 200, Subpart F. This is on the federal kind of blanket level. And an audit is much more of a deep, comprehensive review, where monitoring can be either just continuous monitoring, where it's kind of regular engagement and touch points throughout the year, could be a comprehensive monitoring. An audit is usually a point in time and a much more in-depth process. A note that CoC projects must be monitored annually. So for CoC recipients, you will be monitored on an annual basis. Audits may include both financial and compliance or program components. So both your financial records and your program and participant records may be looked at. Some high-level federal audit requirements. Entities that spend over $1 million in federal awards per fiscal year will have a single or a program-specific audit. This will happen. You will be audited. A single audit is the standard for those who have greater than $1 million in federal awards. Program-specific audits happen if there is kind of standard criteria met, and that is if funds were spent under one program, one federal program, and that program rules don't require a financial statement audit. So this may be that we have, just a single project. So for example, KCRHA had HUD review our rapid rehousing as a program-specific audit, and they also may pick like one particular grant to review. So they may do our whole CoC system as a whole and then pull out one or two individual grants to look at those specific programs. If a less than $1 million was spent, there may be an exemption from regular annual audit. Records still have to be available for federal review. And there, are always special cases where folks will either decide to do an audit or skip an audit for a year. The key is make sure you have documentation saved, clear, organized files, because federal audits will happen and they can be very thorough and a little painful. Along with auditing, I want to talk a bit about monitoring and performance expectations. Some of the general things that are looked at by both HUD and KCRHA in terms of program expectations are looking at program performance. So we're looking at the length of stay in a project, the exit rate to permanent housing. This is for every project that is funded, whether you're a permanent housing project or not. We want to look at the exit rates to permanent housing. Returns to homelessness within a 6 to 24-month period. So look at 6, 12, and 24 months. And it's the returns of those who exit to permanent housing and then return to homelessness. We look at the utilization rates, occupancy, and the number of households being served by a program. And then we also will look at service engagement and case plan documentation. This is a really important one. There are some programs that require at least monthly engagement and case notes. So this is where we really look at those detailed notes that programs are taking, as well as housing stability plans, annual assessments. All of those are reviewed for thoroughness and documentation. All of this can influence CoC rating and ranking and renewal scoring, especially those CoC projects that have small histories, long. We want to see that you have really solid performance, which is become, I wouldn't say become, it is very emphasized with HUD around performance expectations for a strong system. Along with monitoring, audits, having all of those documents saved, making sure you have thorough documentation, there's reporting requirements that you have to engage in. So there may be program performance monitoring that requires us to submit reports to the Office of Management and Budget. We may need to submit reports directly to HUD. There are reports that may come on a quarterly or annual basis. They may be financial related, performance related, talking about financial accomplishments, demonstrating cost effectiveness. There's a number of reports that may be required, and programs need to be responsive quickly when those reporting requirements come up. Most reports at the federal level are wanting to look at accomplishments versus objectives. So what did you say you're going to do? What did you do? How did you meet those objectives? They want you to talk about unmet goals or deviations from the plan. If there were any cost overruns or unit cost issues, if there were significant developments, so major changes, staffing changes, problems, corrective actions, if there were monitoring findings, and there may be site visits, which can be both virtual or in person. Another very important report for the CoC level is the annual performance report. This is to track program outcomes, effectiveness, and compliance for all CoC funded projects. Its goal is to really demonstrate progress and inform funding decisions both at the federal level and at the local level. The key components of this are built into HMIS. So this is a report that's built and can be run in HMIS. Those look at program outcomes related to housing stability, exits to permanent housing, length of stay, income and employment changes, and returns to homelessness. There's an area to discuss in a more of a narrative form, services provided to case management, skill development, healthcare access, support services in general, and then looking at your housing inventory. So the unit availability, utilization, and vacancy rates. These reports happen annually. They are due after the HUD program performance ends. There's a window of time to prepare these reports and get submitted to HUD, but they will always happen on an annual basis. The metrics are very much related to the HUD CoC performance measures, and there is a key eye on data quality, so ensuring that there is accurate and verifiable records. APRs are used to both monitor programs. These are looking at, how well are programs doing? Are there improvement areas that we may want to focus on and provide some technical assistance on? Help guide funding decisions, so looking at projects to put up for renewal, looking at projects that we may want to reallocate if they're not performing well, particularly over a longer period of time. And then we use this for system planning, so assessing kind of community-wide homelessness trends. Are we seeing a lot of returns to homelessness from a certain program type, for example? And can we use some of this information to dig into why that's happening? All right, we're going to shift to talking a bit about HMIS and coordinated entry. Those who were in the session earlier today, you may hear some redundant information. So HMIS and coordinated entry are required for all CoC funded programs. This is a requirement for programs that are receiving any public funding, but it is very much called out explicitly for CoC projects. You're required to enter data into HMIS in line with CoC timeliness standards, collect all universal data elements and program-specific elements. There are caveats for those fleeing domestic violence who will be de-identified. So while they may not consent to have their personal identifying information in HMIS, all of the elements will still be gathered in a de-identified manner. Programs must also participate in coordinated entry. There is a separate system for DV programs. This means accepting referrals through coordinated entry, following prioritization rules, and documenting coordinated entry compliance. HMIS and CE compliance are frequent monitoring issues, so I want to flag that these are very important to ensure you have clear processes and can demonstrate how you are meeting all of these requirements. HMIS participation is outlined in the CFR. The participation is not only required for CoC funding, but it also supports all of our federal reporting, our system planning, and our performance measurement. The more that we have in HMIS accurately put in, the stronger the data around our system is. Data must follow not only HUD standards, but local and state HMIS standards. Universal data elements are required for everything, and there's program-specific data elements based on your project type. As you have a project developed in HMIS, it will populate all the required fields. It's built for that to be as user-friendly as possible, so you're not guessing what elements you need to be entering in. There are timeliness and data quality requirements, particularly around project entry, household updates, and exits. Those need to be entered within certain timeframes that are outlined in our data standards. We also outline the expectations around completeness, accuracy, and consistency. Another vital part of HMIS participation is the privacy, security, and confidentiality. All programs and all individual users must follow HMIS privacy and security standards. There is a required annual training that must be done by all HMIS users, and you must adhere to and affirm that you are following secure user access practices, having privacy notices posted, and doing proper record handling. HMIS data should not be emailed, it should not be saved in unsecure locations. And if the privacy and security standards training is not done annually in a timely fashion, we may revoke access. Again, HMIS costs are eligible, so if you have dedicated costs to data entry into HMIS, you may be able to request those costs within your program budget. Some effective HMIS practices are having very clear goals and required timeframes around data entry, complete and accurate records, so having consistency when you are enrolling folks, exiting folks, updating inventory records, connection with oh my gosh, I just forgot how to talk. It's been a long day. Coordinated entry within HMIS, so doing your assessments, referrals, and outcomes being accurately entered into HMIS. Again, this is another area of privacy and security. So proper handling of records, following all privacy and security protocols, and attending all required and annual trainings. The final kind of key piece for effective HMIS practices is responsiveness during federal reporting. There are a number of reports that are required by our system to submit to HUD, and it is really through all of you who are entering data and supporting that information that these reports are done in an accurate and timely manner. These include the annual performance report, the point in time count, the housing inventory count, system performance measures, longitudinal system analysis, and our CoC NOFO submission. Common pitfalls that we see in HMIS include delayed data entry, so having missing records or records that are not updated long after someone departs, missing and inconsistent data, the overuse of data not collected. We have seen improvements around this over the last few years, so that's really telling to the level of trust that you all build with participants. We want to be able to respond as accurately as possible, as much as possible, and really try not to rely on the data not collected or unknown. Privacy and security risks are another really big issue. Sharing logins, saving your login, outdated access. So if staff have left, not updating to remove access, storing HMIS data outside of approved systems, or sharing data outside of approved processes. These all have reporting impacts. It really impacts the accuracy of annual performance reports, our overall system performance measures, your renewal scoring as an individual project, and HUD monitoring outcomes. So the better the data quality, the better the data product. The better we can show how our system really is performing to make better informed choices and decisions around policy change, around funding changes. So having really good, accurate data is vital to that regard. Finally, with coordinated entry, all CoC projects must have and follow written standards related to household eligibility and screening. We hold these at a system level as well. They need to communicate any project vacancies, including the bed and unit specific information, to our coordinated entry team. Enroll only households that are referred according to the CoC's designated referral process. We received guidance from HUD back in 2022 to end what was called external fills. So all projects with CoC funds must get referrals through our coordinated entry process. And you must commit to participate in the coordinated entity's planning and management activities as established by CoC leadership. So for coordinated entry, we have a number of ways to engage. Our coordinated entry team, of course, is one way to get connected. They hold office hours regularly. They also hold the single adult leadership team and the young adult leadership team to do some system planning for those populations. And then there's the coordinated entry committee, which is a subcommittee of our CoC board that is focused on coordinated entry policies and procedures. For HMIS and CE access, there are a number of things that are required first. A lot of that is training. So we have linked here to the general clarity training, privacy and security training, coordinated entry trainings, the assessor manual, the general BitFocus website, as well as where to set up or do a change request form for a new HMIS program to get started. So if you have a new program that starts, you would request it to be created in HMIS. You can also ask to make changes if your inventory changes or you have other kind of necessary change to make record in HMIS different. Want to just highlight a couple of key takeaways for CoC funds following both 24 CFR 578 and 2 CFR 200. Those will both be relevant and very important regarding program and financial rules. There are a few things to make sure you have as an agency and an entity and a project: clear participant eligibility rules, lease rules and guidance, that you are following VAWA expectations, confidentiality rules, and HMIS compliance. With costs, make sure you are charging only allowable, approved, and documented costs. You must have a record of every penny spent. Track match and program income carefully. These are common error areas. Ooh, say that 4 times fast, 5 times fast. Error area. And then maintaining, again, strong policies, records, and reporting to be audit ready. I used to do internal audits of programs that I managed. My team didn't always like that I did that, but it made our records and our documentation a lot stronger. So don't just prepare for when HUD or KCRHA is coming. Doing some of those internal audits to check and do spot checks along the way is really helpful. And questions. I feel like this one went a little faster than the other one. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can read through and see if there are questions in the chat, and we can get to questions that you all may have. Okay. If you have particular questions on like current processes, please reach out to your contract monitors, as that we are not covering that here. Okay, I see. Can we have per policy all client records electronically and not have a hard copy? Yes, you are allowed to have just electronic records. You need to have a way for those records to be shareable with whoever is auditing you. But yes, there's nothing that says you have to have a hard physical copy. You can be useful for monitoring, but in this day and age, it is also possible to have electronic. Other questions? How big is the audit team? That depends on who. um, KCRHA, it's usually a team of those who are connected to a contract. So it may be someone on the emergency services and housing stability team, a compliance person, a contract person, and a finance team member. So it can be 3 to 4 people reviewing one project. On the HUD end, that depends. When we had HUD auditing, I believe we had 2 people working on that review. Other questions? All right. If you do, you can send those to Kate. I was going to just rattle off. I don't know what I was going to rattle off. It has been a long day. Can't type right now. You can email our inbox, cocquestions@kcrha.org. Whew, my goodness. We will also get this recording up and the slides, so you will have access to those. Yeah, thank you all so much for joining, and have a lovely rest of your Friday. And I will hopefully not talk to any of you until the 29th. All right, have a good one. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to kick folks out so that we can get the recording and post that online. Thank you all.